Hey, you guys, welcome back to C Squad Cinema, a compendium for physical media, film reviews, rambles, and other nerdy movie talk. When trying to pick a film for my second video in the Noirvember series, there's so much to choose from. I thought about covering another black and white classic, maybe from the golden era of film noir. But when looking through the film noir section of my physical media library, I came across a forgotten gem from 2006. That would be Brian De Palma's The Black Dahlia. And yes, this is the very same Brian De Palma that brought us Scarface and The Untouchables. He also helmed the first chapter of the Mission Impossible film series, not to mention one of my absolute favorite John Travolta films, Blowout. Yes, Brian De Palma is a great director, known for some all-time classics like the ones I just mentioned. Which brings us to The Black Dahlia. Now, interestingly enough, The Black Dahlia was Brian De Palma's last major feature film that was released theatrically. He's only directed about 3 feature films since The Black Dahlia, and those were independently released and financed. And a big reason that he kind of went away from the mainstream is because of this film. So, what happened? Why did this once great director kind of fall into obscurity after The Black Dahlia? Well, the story is not as interesting as the film itself. Essentially, The Black Dahlia didn't do well in the theater. It barely earned back its budget. And as a result, Brian De Palma was kind of ousted from the major Hollywood studios. And that's a real shame because I think The Black Dahlia is actually a tremendous modern film noir. And I know I mentioned neo-noir in my last video, but The Black Dahlia is really distinct from your average neo-noir film in that it really replicates the classic feeling of a film noir from the 1940s. The Black Dahlia is quintessentially film noir. Now, for those of you that haven't seen it, The Black Dahlia is based on the novel of the same name by author James Ellroy. If that's a name you don't recognize, he also wrote the novel L.A. Confidential, for which that film was based. I would advise you to go read up on James Ellroy. I think he is one of the great American novelists. And The Black Dahlia and L.A. Confidential both are part of what is referred to as the L.A. Quartet, 4 novels written by Ellroy that chronicle different murders in Los Angeles, mostly during the 40s and 50s. And James Ellroy is a fascinating figure because when he was very young, he had an interesting relationship with his mother. And when James Ellroy was 10 years old, his mother was actually murdered, and the crime was never solved. So considering the sort of traumas that James Ellroy experienced as a child, he could have grown up and gone down a very different path. But he channeled a lot of what he was feeling into this series of novels early on. And a lot of his feelings about his own mother's unsolved murder, he channeled into his novel for The Black Dahlia. Now, The Black Dahlia is loosely based on the real-life unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short. She was a young woman who moved to Los Angeles to become an actress and was killed. Elizabeth Short's remains were found abandoned and mutilated in a vacant lot in the Los Angeles area in 1947. So both the novel and the film use the murder of Elizabeth Short as a jumping off point for a really dark, complex film noir story. Now, the main character, played by Josh Hartnett here, is Bucky Bleichert. And if that's not your classic film noir name, I don't know what is. And Bucky has a partner in the Los Angeles Police Department named Lee Blanchard. The two of them are referred to as Fire and Ice because they both have respective boxing careers, and the two of them are pitted together in a boxing match as a publicity stunt to garner some support for a ballot that's going to give additional funding to the police department in Los Angeles. So shortly after that boxing match and them being paired together as detective partners, there's the murder of Elizabeth Short. And each of them goes about investigating the murder in their own unique way. While Bucky takes a much more police procedural approach to the investigation, Lee is driven by some unknown personal vendetta that starts to kind of drive him mad. Well, we come to find out there's some dark history in Lee's past that's tied with his girlfriend, Kay, played by Scarlett Johansson. Now, Scarlett Johansson in this film is an absolute natural. She looks like an actress of that era. And I would actually be interested to see an alternate version of the Black Dahlia that's in black and white. Because if you put that up alongside some of the great film noirs of the 1940s, I'm telling you, this film fits right in. And of course, what is a great film noir without a femme fatale, here played by Hilary Swank as a character known as Madeline. Bucky comes across her as part of the investigation, and as it turns out, her family may have had some personal history with Elizabeth Short. I first saw the Black Dahlia when it came out in September 2006, and I remember loving it at the time. But I also remember that it didn't perform well. It kind of flew under the radar and not a lot of people talked about it. Well, as a young chap of 21 at the time, I probably didn't give much thought to why or care. But revisiting it now and thinking about its legacy, especially considering it removed a really great director from making major releases, it's left me perplexed as to why this was the movie that basically ended Brian De Palma's career. He didn't deserve that, and certainly not because of a film of this quality. The Black Dahlia is actually a great example of modern film noir, and maybe that was the issue. Film noir is sort of a genre that dropped off the map for a while, and maybe that's because the lead characters of film noir are seedier, or at least more ambiguous. You know, the lead characters in film noir are often very flawed. You know, they often harbor these dark secrets that fit right in with the overall theme of the films they're portrayed in. And part of me wonders if society just became uncomfortable. People didn't like to think about the darkest aspects of human nature and that we may be flawed people. Well, I like to see human flaw portrayed on film, especially in fatalistic stories that involve, the worst crimes of humanity being investigated by people who are far from perfect themselves. I think film noir is a genre that's ripe for meaning, not to mention very compelling because they are usually attempting to solve some great mystery. And the Black Dahlia is certainly that. I had my recent review of Zodiac on 4K. Well, you could argue that the Black Dahlia is sort of a spiritual predecessor to Zodiac because it also chronicles the investigation of a real, true-to-life murder and provides it a fictional resolution that in real life we never got. And I think a lot of its compelling nature is owed to James Ellroy's source novel. Now, of course, he didn't pen the screenplay himself. That credit goes to Josh Freeman, who I think did a pretty good job, considering that James Ellroy himself has basically said that his novels aren't really adaptable to the big screen. Fun fact, he actually liked LA Confidential, and he also had some high praise for Brian De Palma's film. However, James Ellroy saw a 3-hour cut of the Black Dahlia, and there was some criticism when this film was released that the plot was too convoluted. I would argue that a 3-hour version would certainly be more convoluted than what we get with the theatrical cut. And I think the theatrical cut is pretty straightforward. I mean, you have 2 detectives as the main characters. You get a snippet of each of their lives before they start down the path of this investigation into a murder, and their personal relationships that start to take left and right and curvy turns. But convoluted plots are one of the things that make film noir a really fun genre. But I also wonder if the movie didn't perform well because this came not too long after Josh Hartnett starred in Pearl Harbor. That film itself was no stranger to some criticism, and I almost wonder if people didn't expect Josh Hartnett to be this typecast heartthrob. And I think that expectation is something Josh Hartnett tried to move away from, which is why he sort of went quiet for a while before having this second surge in his career, picking some really interesting things. Look no further than Trap. But in the Black Dahlia, Josh Hartnett does a really good job. His look fits right in with the film noir, and he even gives this pretty monotone monologue that's in line with some of the classics. It's a very strong script, and I think it gives Josh Hartnett some material that it's really one of his better performances of that era. And I think people that didn't go see this, it's a real missed opportunity for something that's a really fun film. And this also has Aaron Eckhart before Aaron Eckhart was cool because of The Dark Knight. You know, The Black Dahlia was 2 years before The Dark Knight. And while his role, I feel like, was probably trimmed down, I think what he brings to the film is a really good sense of mystery. And the audience being left to wonder what's going on with him is kind of a good counter to the main narrative that Josh Hartnett is a part of. And the film is also a showcase for the star power of Scarlett Johansson and Hilary Swank, who are at the top of their game here, filling in these roles that are absolutely the central cornerstone of the story. And the absolutely wonderful Fiona Shaw also appears in this film in a smaller but really interesting role. And I just can't help but think that The Black Dahlia is an underseen gem. Nobody really talks about this film anymore, and that's too bad, because it really does harken back to the heyday of the truly great film noirs. Even setting that aside, this is one of Brian De Palma's consistently great films. There's a sequence late in this film that continues De Palma's theme of staging some tense set pieces on a grand staircase of some kind. There's one in The Untouchables. There's also one in the also underrated Carlito's Way. But even though it may have been trimmed down from its original 3-hour version, The Black Dahlia is a really solid entry in his filmography, and I just cannot understand how it ended his career effectively. You know, it's shot really well. In addition to wanting to see a black and white version, I would love to see the original length version. And it goes without saying that I would love to see this film in 4K. Now, for its age, the Blu-ray holds up pretty well. It's a very filmic looking movie, and you can tell De Palma shot it with every intention of having it appear as a modern version of those seedy film noirs from the 1940s. I'm actually kind of shocked there wasn't a version of this released in black and white. You know, they've done that with some other movies like The Mist, or even with Logan. I think that doing versions of films in black and white is becoming a more mainstream thing to do with films that harken back to that era of filmmaking. And The Black Dahlia would be a great one to do that with. So you guys, I absolutely recommend The Black Dahlia. Not only is it one of Brian De Palma's great films, it did not deserve its own fate. And Brian De Palma certainly did not deserve to be ousted from making films because of it. So please watch it if you've never seen it, and revisit it if you can't remember it. It's an underrated gem of the film noir genre, and you'll love it, I promise. So that's my take on The Black Dahlia, a great film noir for Noirvember. So keep it right here with C Squad Cinema. I'll be back with at least one more Noirvember title before we segue into the holiday season and bring you a couple things you might be surprised by. Until then, I'll see you next time.